Hello, it's Surendra Kagat, and in our last class we studied with the pre-romantics. In our today's class we shall deal with just in the chronological order after pre-romantics, high romantics, romanticism in general. What romanticism is, this very particular term, romanticism, how it was evolved, what were the circumstantial parts, what were the historical periods, what are the salient features, major features, who were the major poets. So, in this year we have two literary history parts. Pre-romantics we studied in our last class. Today it's turn to go for romantics. So, this period, the entire period for this year for literary history or the poets we should come across, they are approximately from 1740 to 1830. So, this is almost a period of 90 years. So, first 50 years from 1740 to late 90s, late 80s, I mean there was a historical political movement in world history. There was a movement we call with the name French Revolution. In France, in the year 1789, there was a movement, historical political movement, and we call it with the name French Revolution. French Revolution, we all are aware of it. Students of history and political science, they do go with this revolution as well. So, literature mirrors the surroundings, the historical, political, religious, sociological, psychological, philosophical surroundings. So, this is the demarcation, this is the time, this is a particular data, this numerical 1789. In literary world, we find romanticism from 1798. Why so? So, 1789 to 1798. There is a gap of 9 years. In literature, there is no movement which we can call which starts from one particular date and which ends up with another. Literature in literary romantic movement, historically, politically it is 1789, but in literature we find it from 1798. We will discuss it why so. So, French Revolution was a historical political movement, as you said, and there was a motive, there was a logo, there was a set of words, there was a kind of what shall I say, a frame which dealt with three particular words. If we remember French Revolution, there are three words attached to it: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty, the libertine attitude, freedom; equality, we know, equality with no distinctions, with no differentiations; and fraternity, the brotherhood, the bond of brotherhood, the bond of sisterhood. We in Indian context we can say Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, short of. So, this kind of an idealistic approach, in fact, it didn't last long. It survived only for a period of 30 to 40 years only, unluckily, till 1830, before the reform bill passed in British Parliament in 1832, which was succeeded by Victorian times, particularly in our literary frames. So, this period from 1789, or I better say from 1798 for we people, to 1830. So, a very shorter span. There, what we discussed in pre-romantics, there was a series of poets which started from Thomson to Gray, Collins, Cooper, Black. But the year, I once repeat, 1798. Why this particular year, this particular date, this particular time slot is so overly repeated? Because there was a publication of a book. A book was published, and we give too much weightage to it. We overemphasize it. The book was with the title Lyrical Ballads. When was it published? 1798. Lyrical Ballads was published in the year 1798, and we literary students find Romanticism from that year of publication of Lyrical Ballads, which was written by the top romantics, the high romantics, or from whom Romanticism is much honored, is much celebrated. Those poets were, we all know, we must have heard of. Even non-literary students, they also knew the names, the big tycoons, the big icons of the literary world: William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. Wordsworth and Coleridge, and there is a name, De Quincey, Thomas De Quincey. Wordsworth and Coleridge are in our syllabus. And there is the third name, De Quincey, Thomas De Quincey. They were very good friends. They studied together, their schooling, they got their university degree, they wrote together, they published together, so they befriended one another. So Romanticism is what is personal, is what we call individualistic, is what is subjective, the very personal, subjective. So Romanticism, which we talked in pre-romantics, that they drifted from the rational or from the fixed forms to from neoclassical values to freedom or liberty or personal or the elegiac parts. So this high romanticism is heralded with the publication of Lyrical Ballads from 1798. And what were those major motifs which dealt with this particular period, a very short period though? It is subjective, it's not objective. It talks of the person, it talks of an individual, it talks of emotional integrity, it talks of sentiments. That is what subjective or the personal is. It talks of freedom in general. So it was a movement against enlightenment. It was a movement against materialism. It was a movement towards the free and wild. It was a movement towards the individualistic, the personal, the emotional, the sentimental, the softer themes of human life. It had nothing to do with the urban space, or if it is, it's also vouchsafed or molded in or enveloped in a kind of a thing which nowhere make us feel about the stony, about the physical, but it gives certain directions over those very materialistic, stony structures to the emotional, the sentimental, the meditative, the personal, the individualistic, the free, the wild, the open. So the publication of Lyrical Ballads, it started the big movement of literary history, what we call with the name Romanticism. And who were the major figures? Wordsworth and Coleridge. Why? Because the publication of Lyrical Ballads in the year 1798, and later on Wordsworth wrote its preface 2 years after, in 1800, preface to the Lyrical Ballads. Three more major figures are there in this romantic world, and we call them three younger romantics. Might you have studied them in your schooling. They are Keats, Shelley and Byron. John Keats, P.B. Shelley, Percy B.C. Shelley, and Byron, G.G. Byron, George Gordon Byron. They are in our syllabus. Byron is not prescribed though, but we cannot neglect Byron. They were very good friends. Again, we call them younger romantics, and Wordsworth and Coleridge we call high romantics. Why we call them younger romantics? Younger, the reason behind that very word younger is they all three, Keats, Shelley, Byron, all these three poets, they died young. They died before the age of 30. What a brutal coincidence. Had they lived, might they have surpassed anybody in the literary world, I dare say. So revolutionary, so sensuous, so rebellious, unsurpassable, I say, unexcelled. Had they lived, you must have witnessed big dams, the individualistic poems, the single poems with which a particular poet is much known, as Gray is known after his elegy written in a country churchyard. We find Shelley after his two lofty odes, or to the west wind or to a skylark. Shelley, who wrote The Revolt of Islam, Prometheus Unbound, who wrote on death of Keats, though he died a year after, Adonis, an elegy written on the death of the poet Keats. I must mention here, there was a person with the name Lady Clare, and all these three young poets, they visited Italian parts as well. So Italian background we seldom see in their poetry, though Byron stayed there for a very longer time, and people say Byron was there in love with Lady Clare. So after death of Keats, Shelley wrote Adonis, and after death of Shelley, Lady Clare commented in her letters that the poet is a creator and a destroyer. Those very words, creator and destroyer, they were taken from Shelley's poem Ode to the West Wind. To the West Wind, where Shelley says, West Wind is a preserver and destroyer, and she somehow make them know to the literary world that Shelley is there, Shelley is still there, Shelley will live forever till the world will write and read. That kind of poetry comes out of these three young poets. G.G. Byron, who wrote Child Herald, cantos of poetic part. He wrote She Walks in Beauty, but unluckily he is not there, and we cannot include everybody, because in this 3-year degree course we will know the poets, authors, writers, know the creative minds in tits and bits, in nooks and corners, at the surface level, at basic level, or we will slightly introduced with these poets or the authors who deal with such bigger movements. Keats, the great master of sensuousness. Keats, the greatest of the ode writers. Keats, whose very famous odes, Ode to Grecian Urn, Ode to Nightingale, Ode to Psyche, Ode on Melancholy, Ode on Indolence, Ode to Autumn. Ode to Autumn is there in our study. He is a sonneteer as well. So Keats, the revival of classicism and all that. So this year's romantic movement, particularly, which deals with creativity, imagination, subjectivity, personal, individualistic, freedom, openness, nature. Wordsworth, the priest of nature, we call him. Wordsworth is who said child is the father of man. Spontaneity, the very word spontaneity. Spontaneity is the key element here. It's spontaneous, it's unpremeditated, it's not thought before. So that is what Romanticism is, and we shall deal with Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley, Byron. We shall deal with creativity, nature, freedom, openness, skies, wild, all that geographical, all that landscape, all that which deals with the softer human emotions. So this is for our today's class, and in our next class we might be dealing with certain literary terms which will deal with our literary term part in the last unit, and which we must know before reading of the text. So we hopefully be talking about some literary terms, some major terms which we also dealt in our first year, where certain basic terms were there, the kinds of poems or the kinds of comparative studies. In the same pattern, we shall also be dealing with certain literary terms this year, and those terms are related to our poetic or the prose parts as well, or to the literary parts as well. So in our next class we shall deal with literary term part. One or two terms we shall discuss. So this is all for our today's class. Thank you.